Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at Aberrant Reflections. This is a very creative and interesting little puzzle dungeon with some really fantastic layout that I think it was inspired by my own adventure at the Waking of Willoughby Hall. So it's really cool to see that influence kind of bleed over into other books. Here is the back of our adventure. At the bottom of an ancient temple, beyond the mirror's edge, lies the spot where reality was sundered. Fortune and power await those who learn its secrets. A fate worse than death is reserved for those who fail. You've come to plunder the temple between worlds and gaze into its aberrant reflections. So the whole premise of this particular adventure, which is just a short little dungeon, is that it is a dungeon that exists kind of in two places at once. There's the normal dungeon, and then there is the aberrant dungeon that is overlaid on it and is pretty much the same, but with some significant differences. And you're going to be able to cross over between these two worlds as you explore, and there's tons of shenanigans involved with that players could potentially pull off if they're clever. And that's exactly the kind of adventure that I love. I should point out that, as usual, links to where you can get the PDF of this are in the description below. The print version seems a little bit hard to find right now, but I was sent more than one copy of this, so I will put a copy of this in my monthly giveaway in case you want to try and win that. All you have to do is make sure you're subscribed to the Questing Beast newsletter. It's totally free, and you could win this. You could win a copy of Willoughby Hall, or my other monthly giveaway, which is Rackham Vale. So lots of different prizes that you could win this month. All right, let's see what we get inside. We have an opening, which is really great. This is the inside cover, and this is an overview of the entire adventure. So I mentioned Willoughby Hall, so my adventure does something very similar, where you have a complete overview right at the very front. And this does a great job of that. It doesn't have room numbers, which is nice. Instead, there are room names. So you can look at each of these rooms. You can see from the drawings what's inside there. You can see the name of the room. It tells you what page it's on. So this works as a kind of table of contents. And there is a short summary of each of the room's contents right there on the front page. By reading this, you get a very clear overview of what you're in for, which is great for when you go forward reading the book. You already have the big picture embedded in your head, which makes things much easier to process and understand. There's a good amount of different room shapes here. There's good jaquazing, where there's different loops and ways that you can travel and explore this particular map. There are secret passages to uncover. And you'll notice that there is a number of purple features done in a different color ink. That's really important because those are the features that exist only in the parallel universe version of this dungeon. So great use of color there to call that out and make it much easier to run. This is written by Direct Sun, cover art by Jacob Fleming. I've seen a lot of Jacob's art recently in some of these zine products, and I do like it a lot, especially his black and white art. We have a timeline at the very beginning, again, a little bit like Waking of Willoughby Hall, that tells you about how this dungeon got here and the situation that you're in. Basically, the reality was splintered a long time ago by the falling of this falling star. And the whole temple was built up around it. And the way that it splintered reality has caused this parallel universe to exist right side by side with our own. The referee notes at the beginning do a great job in summarizing the important differences between this adventure and other D&D adventures. You have the Aberrant, which is the name of the parallel universe, and mirrors are a really big theme here, because if you find these special mirrors, you can actually see what is going on in the parallel universe in your room. So you might find things that are slightly different, and that can give you clues of things that you might want to do. Music and rhythm cause the mirrors to wobble and shimmer, and these mirrors act as portals between worlds that remain open for a few seconds after the screech of a hashara, which is this spider-like creature from the parallel dimension, as they can try and break through the mirrors and come into your world. So you want to watch out for them trying to attack you, but you can also use that as an opportunity to pass over into the other world for your own purposes. This is an adventure that knows that it is built for puzzle solving and for shenanigans. So it has some DM advice right here to get you started. It lets you know that your players are going to be using the mirrors to see the aberrant, manipulating objects there. There are special objects that you can find in the dungeon that only exist in the parallel dimension. There are stuff that exists in both. There are sometimes you want to take one object and bring it over into the other dimension to solve a particular problem. There's a lot of different tricky stuff going on there. And this does a great job of just letting you know what you're in for and things to think about while you're running the adventure. I love that it calls out the fact that PCs can try anything, encourage out-of-the-box solutions, let PCs attempt an idea if it even has a chance of success. In a situation this strange, players are going to think of very strange solutions that you didn't think of, and you're going to have to be able to roll with that. Some of the creatures you might run into include Emil, I think that's how you say his name, the mirror shard golem who goes around cleaning up messes that adventurers keep making. I love that. You have the Fallen, which is a sort of gooey parasite being that is leaking across dimensions into our world. You can't really kill it, but you can slow it down and kind of melt it a bit by using Lemon Magic's cleaning solution. Basically, you just squirt like Mr. Clean at him and it creates this fresh lemon scent and he melts. He's going to regenerate eventually, but you can definitely delay him while you need to get some stuff done. If you get absorbed by this guy, he is going to turn you into a doppelganger or create a doppelganger clone of you that will eventually turn into more of the Fallen as this thing spreads across the dungeon and possibly the world if you let it escape. Apart from that, the main enemies are the Hashara, these weird spider beings, some flesh golems, a bunch of different ghouls, a tentaghoul, which is like a really big ghoul with tentacles, as you might expect, and this guy who was an adventurer that's been turned into a doppelganger. Next up, we have the dungeon itself, but first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Into the AM, a longtime sponsor of the channel who make really fantastic graphic t-shirts, like the one I'm wearing right now. They come in all sorts of different designs, from psychedelic to fantasy to science fiction. Basically, no matter what role-playing game you happen to be running, you'll be able to find tees that match that particular theme. The shirts are really comfortable, and they've lasted me a really long time, and they've stayed soft the whole time. They often have great deals over on their website as well. For example, if you buy t-shirts in a bundle, you can often get their prices down to like $17 each, which is a really great deal. And if you use my link in the description below, you can also get 10% off of their entire web store. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring the video. And now let's get back to the show. All right, so here is our first room, and let's look at the way that this is designed, which is great. First of all, most of these rooms have actual pictures of what it's like to stand in that room and look at it, which is great. Not very many adventurers do this. Things like the Tomb of Horrors used to do this, and it allows you to actually give these images to players kind of as a handout so they can immediately visualize what's going on. That's especially important because some of these rooms are very strange, especially when it comes to what you are seeing in the mirrors. I love how this mirror is actually done in purple, so you know that this is something that's happening in the Aberrant. Each room has a little mini map at the bottom, so you know exactly where you are, you know where you could be going next, and these rooms are not only named, it has the page numbers on them, so you know exactly where to turn if players go in that direction. Excellent. The description is done in a nice bullet point format, and there are kind of sub-bullet points, so if you look at the first level, that's the first thing you would notice, and then if you get closer to something and examine it, or maybe look inside something, then you go to an indented bullet point so that you know you're getting more details on that particular thing. Again, the stuff that's in purple is stuff that only exists in the parallel version of that room. The first room is designed in a very smart way because it immediately teaches you what's going on with this dungeon. You walk into this first room and you notice that this statue is facing this way, but its reflection in the mirror is facing this way. So the reflections are not lining up with reality. That should immediately be noticed as something weird. So of course you might want to line them up. If you turn this statue so that it's facing its reflection, then suddenly a little secret compartment will open up in the bottom of it, which you can see over there in the reflection. That's a great little primer to get players in the right mindset. The very next room is a room where you can see tons of treasure in the room, but none in the real world version of it. You can just see it right there across the mirror. So that immediately tells the players, there's got to be a way to get this treasure. I can't seem to interact with it over here, but it's somewhere where I can get it. So players are going to start thinking about ways to get across the mirror. Hopefully, if they run into one of these Hashara, spider beings, then they're going to discover that they can cross over and make their way to this treasure-laden version of the room. And there's lots of treasure here, including a genie that can actually grant you a wish, which is quite a lot for a low-level party, which is what this adventure is designed for, but that's some pretty strong incentive. Some of the rooms are straight up puzzles. For example, the toll room over here, there is a giant stone slab blocking the way in, but only in the parallel world. So in the real world, you can walk straight through there, no problem. You go in here and you look in the mirror and you can see that there is a tiny little bell right here in the room. And of course, you're going to want to get that bell. It is in fact a magic item that allows you to pass between mirrors freely, but it starts out in the other world. How are you going to get a hold of it? Well, there's some magic items that might help you do that. But once you do get a hold of that, you somehow manage to grab it in the other world, how are you going to pass back through here through this stone slab? So there's different layers of puzzles here, different steps you're going to have to think through, and players are going to find all sorts of ways to solve this. The hub room has a giant wheel, which in the parallel world has 5 of these golems, missing just 1 golem, preparing to turn this wheel. If you find the 6th golem, then you can actually spin this thing and raise that stone slab. One of the rooms, the armory, you can actually find the phase gauntlet, a really powerful magic item that exists in both worlds at the same time, which is such a fun idea because you can grab stuff in your world, but it's also going to run into stuff in the other world that you can't interact with where you are, which is going to get very confusing, but also really fun. So for example, you pick up this gauntlet. I mean, you can't actually see it in our world. You can only see it in the mirror. So you'd have to look in the mirror and kind of guide your hand to where the gauntlet is, and then you'd be able to feel it. But if you tried to walk, for example, through this rock slide over here, you could walk through the rock slide, but the gauntlet couldn't because it actually exists in that world at the same time. Another great magic item, you have this big black tapestry that undead are not allowed to pass through. And it says very clearly that if you take this down, it's going to keep working. So you could carry it around the dungeon and use it to try and block the undead from walking towards you. And players are going to find all sorts of other weird ways to use that. Like, what happens if you throw it over a zombie's head? Is it just frozen in place? Does it die? You'll probably have to improv something for that. There's a tomb right here where there is a key. This is the phase key. And like the phase gauntlet, it actually works in both worlds, but it's going to be affected by both things. So it starts off in a really great little puzzle situation where it appears to begin just floating in midair, which seems a little strange. You reach out and try and grab it, and it feels like it's stuck, like there's something holding it back. You can pull it really hard and kind of drag it off this pedestal, but it feels like it's inside something. And indeed it is, because it's inside the backpack of an adventurer that's in the parallel dimension. So you're gonna have to try and figure out a way to manipulate it and get it outside of a locked backpack that you can't manipulate. How are you gonna do that? I don't even know, but players are gonna find something out. Perhaps if they took it and they dragged the key with the body down in front of a mirror, they could see what was actually going on and they'd be able to find a way to get it out. What a great little problem to solve. It's the sort of problem that I love where you're not going to be able to use skill checks or rolls to solve it. You're going to actually have to use real brain power and try and figure out what the situation is and what a reasonable solution would be. There's a little secret area down here. You can find a magic sword where if you die while holding it, it traps your soul inside it. And indeed, the adventurer has died who used to have it, and now he is stuck inside the sword, and he's terrified of the dark, so he doesn't want you to ever sheathe the sword where it's dark. But it emits a lot of light, so that could be very useful in dark parts of the dungeon. But you're going to have this guy whining the entire time, which is great. Another little puzzle here where you have to turn the statues to face in the right direction as they are in the Aberrant, but there's no mirror in this room. So now we're reaching problems where the players are going to have to find a mirror and get it over here, or perhaps actually travel to the alternate world and observe the differences before they mess around with the puzzle. There's great little touches, like a room where a lemon tree or a weird lemon-like tree is growing in the light of some powerful sunlight, which seems weird at first until you realize that there is a hole in the floor of the room where sunlight or something like sunlight is shining through in the Aberrant. And it's reflecting off of this mirror into the real world and actually allowing this tree to grow. And that's where they're making the lemon-scented cleaning solution that dissolves that weird goop monster that you might run into. There's a demon maw room where, a lot like the Tomb of Horrors, there is a demon mouth you can reach your hand in. It will chop your hand off if you stick your hand in, but not if you do it in the Aberrant. And of course, you need to find a way to get over there to start with. Or maybe you have that phase gauntlet, and that's going to allow you to pull the lever inside its mouth that only exists in the parallel world. But if you do that, it's still going to cut off your hand in the real world. So maybe find a way to jam it in the real world and then reach through with the phase gauntlet. So many different ways you could do this. If you pull that off, that'll raise the portcullis and you can get through here. Or you can try and get around the other way through this claustrophobic flesh tunnel, but that is going to present dangers of its own, as you might imagine. There's a pit here that only exists in the parallel world. There was a grotto full of weird mushrooms that you can use to make useful potions. But there is a lake of water in the middle that works as a mirror. So you can see the creatures in the other dimension that could crawl up through the water into yours if they see you. Because the dungeon is a little bit tricky, there is kind of a cheat code here where there is an emaciated ghoul in here that will answer questions about the dungeon, but only if you pay the price, which is usually body parts. And you could cut off your own body parts, but maybe you can find the body parts of other half-decayed adventurers. Perhaps he would accept that as an appropriate price. And that's going to give you clues as to how to actually deal with some of the weirder problems in here. An intangible storage room where you have these sort of blocks of agate sunk into the wall that you can't put your hand through unless you're in the parallel world. And if you're in there, then it's actually an open cube going into the wall where different useful adventuring materials can be found, like acid, candles, chalk, salt, and things like that. Near the end of the adventure, things get really crazy when you find the Brilliant Prison, which, at least in the parallel world, is where the fallen star landed. And you can, if you actually find this parallel universe hole and climb down to where it still lies, the sort of glowing, pulsing star, you can talk to it. And it might ask you, do you want to launch? And if you say yes, the entire dungeon takes off into the sky as a spaceship, and you can start traveling to other worlds and use it as a mobile base. That sort of thing is always a ton of fun, giving players a mobile base that they can work from. And of course, it's going to create all sorts of plot hooks that are going to connect to that, because enemies, especially higher level enemies, are definitely going to want a flying dungeon that they can pilot around. So you're going to become the target of all sorts of nasty people that you're going to have to deal with. But it's also a flying dungeon, so I feel like that's a nice trade-off. Some adventure aftermath here, giving you some ideas for what might happen depending on what the players do. And the players really have the opportunity to really trash the campaign setting depending on their actions. They could unleash some of the horrors in this tomb that might spread across the world in a way that's actually very difficult for anyone to defeat. And of course, there's the flying tomb thing as well. So there you go. That is Aberrant Reflections, a nice, clean little dungeon. It's clean, but it's not necessarily simple. There's definitely complexity here in terms of, you should read it a couple of times, I would guess, to make sure you understand where everything is and how everything relates to everything else. But if you have a group of players that love shenanigans and love putting their brains to work to solve problems in unorthodox ways, this is probably going to be an adventure that they would love. And it's the sort of thing that I love. So strongly recommend this. I would love to see more dungeons along this vein that have a strong theme and really put the players to work in terms of finding out fun solutions. It's also a great example of a puzzle dungeon that doesn't have one solution that players must find. There's so many ways they could tackle this that it's going to make the players feel really smart, no matter what their strategy ends up being. As usual, links to this are in the description below, so go check that out if you want to pick up a copy for yourself. And of course, remember to subscribe to the Questing Beast newsletter if you want to get in the running for my monthly giveaways of different D&D material. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.